Тепер є приємність моя представити до звіту від Світового конгресу українців, президента Світового конгресу українців Павла Грода. And it's also my pleasure to assist Paul Grod in the presentation of the report of the Ukrainian World Congress, General Rick Hillier. Please.
Дякую, Євгене. Євген вчора чудо витворяв в тому, що він пізну годину почав, а все ж таки майже на час завершив. То за це, що, Євгене, ти забрав мені 5 хвилин мого часу сьогодні, то я трошки буду також відбирати. Сподіваюся, що ти доженеш. Шановні учасники, пані президент Конгресу українців Канади, шановні делегати, шановні друзі, слава Україні! Мені дуже приємно сьогодні прозвітувати про працю Світового конгресу українців, але дуже так стисло і про нашу працю, відколи почалася повномасштабна війна в Україні. І найголовніше я хотів зосередитися на тим, що є наша і ваша роль. Бо Конгрес українців Канади, я буду говорити будь-якій громаді я зустрічаюся де-небудь у світі. Ви є найбільш потужна, зорганізована українська громада у світі. І за це я вам вдячний. Але за це також, я вам кажу, у вас є величезні відповідальності. Не тільки будувати сильну українську громаду в Канаді, але також і допомагати розбудовувати сильні громади всюди у світі. І, мабуть, тому головний офіс чи Світовий конгрес українців все був сфокусований і головний штаб був тут в Канаді. Я хочу почати з цього, що наш головний фокус, коли ми почали війну, це є 3 головні тези. Це є, перш за все, адвокаційна, комунікаційна праця. Друга – це є об'єднуючи і використовуючи наші громади всюди у світі. І третє – це є підтримка захисників України. I'm going to switch into English just because that's how we set up our presentation. And I'm very pleased and honored to be here together with my colleague, my friend, General Rick Hillier, who I will make a proper introduction to later, who has been very active since the really start of the war in supporting the Ukrainian World Congress, the Ukrainian people, in defending themselves against Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine. The Ukrainian World Congress, as you know, is an umbrella organization in over 60 countries around the world. We have member organizations in over 60 countries around the world, uniting a global community, arguably 20+ million Ukrainians around the world. We have been really, again, during the war, focused on these 3 major pillars: advocacy, uniting and using our communities around the world, and supporting Ukraine's defenders. We have a global presence: Toronto, Kyiv, Brussels, New York. And we're continuing to build those presences. Why those areas? Toronto has been the headquarters of the Ukrainian World Congress for many decades. The organization has been actively uniting the global Ukrainian diaspora for over 55 years. Brussels, we're focused on EU advocacy. New York focused on UN advocacy, and Kyiv for obvious reasons. And I'm very pleased that we're joined here today by the director of our Ukraine mission, Mr. Serhiy Kosyanchuk. Serhiy, please stand up. Since the beginning of the war, we also set up a satellite office in Przemyśl, Poland, which is on the border of Poland and Ukraine, to manage our logistics around Unite with Ukraine, which I'll get into a bit later. So quick video.
On February 24th, 2022, the world changed forever. Every Ukrainian started fighting the occupiers in all possible ways. Ukrainians around the world took to the streets in New York, Chicago, London, Paris, Toronto, and Berlin to call on the world to unite in support of Ukraine long before the outbreak of hostilities. For 55 years, the Ukrainian World Congress has united more than 20 million Ukrainians in more than 60 countries. We operate on the invisible diplomatic front to make it easier for Ukrainians to defend their interests at home. Unite with Ukraine is the first global initiative of Ukrainians around the world in support of our defenders. Under the slogan Unite with Ukraine, we unite the global community to restore peace in Ukraine. The call to unite Ukraine is picked up by the world media. The initiative is gaining support in Toronto, Brussels, London, and Davos.
Here at Ukraine House in Davos, Switzerland during the World Economic Forum. Ukraine House is really the center of Ukrainian activity here in Davos, which in fact today is really the topic of Ukraine is front and center on the entire Davos agenda.
We raise funds, purchase, and deliver protective and medical equipment to members of Ukraine's territorial defense. Unite with Ukraine initiative has raised more than $23 million, including helmets, bulletproof vests, gas masks, first aid kits, drones, cars, and unmanned aerial vehicles. And this is just the beginning. The next step is to rebuild what's been destroyed. Let's unite to build Ukraine. Unite with Ukraine.
I apologize, those numbers are a bit dated by a couple of weeks. We have today raised over $40 million for Unite with Ukraine. And delivered 30 million of those dollars to the defenders of Ukraine. And we are actively deploying the additional $10 million, which we received from the government of Alberta about 3 weeks ago. And so there is a team. The Unite with Ukraine team is actively, they're on the ground today in Ukraine, assessing the needs, doing the procurement, and really preparing for the winter. And we'll talk about Unite with Ukraine further at the end, but let me just to give you a quick tour of the last 7 months. February, we all knew what happened, millions of protesters. And that's really one of the key attributes of the Ukrainian World Congress and our member organizations around the world. There have been massive protests, tens and tens of thousands of people in various cities around the world over the last 9 months have been protesting and supporting. And I have to say that Canada has really been a beacon for many of those. And we started well before February, and I have to provide a lot of thanks and gratitude to the Ukrainian Canadian Congress, in particular to Laisy Hichi, our president, who really even before the war began, we knew things were stirring up. And we started to work together with the Canada-Ukraine Foundation here in Canada, and we're saying, we're getting ready because something will be happening in Ukraine. And so great platitudes for the foresight of the Ukrainian Canadian Congress and the Canada-Ukraine Foundation for understanding that there will be a need. So when the war broke out, the full-scale invasion broke out, we were ready. So thank you for that. It talked about opening the Premiership Office to assist the defenders, and we launched the initiative Stand with Ukraine, Unite with Ukraine. In March, we met with very senior government officials around the world, Poland, Croatia, London, England, right around the world, to help support our Unite with Ukraine initiative. Other NGOs on the border of Poland and Ukraine in particular we're working with. Our communities were very active and on the border fronts. And it's those who did visit Poland or the border countries will test the extent of the engagement of the Ukrainian communities around the world, but in particular in those border countries like Poland, Hungary, Romania, and Moldova. In April, we raised $18 million, and we launched the first tranche and got the organization running, the Unite with Ukraine organization, because to deploy funds, to procure military equipment takes a lot of logistics, and we were able to build a strong team very quickly. In May, we started various advocacy initiatives like Russia Shame Day. As you may know, at the beginning of May, on May 8th, the Russian Federation likes to take claim for being Russia Victory Day, and we started a global action called Russia Shame Day. And these are the types of actions that we continue to do together. And this is not, I just want to be clear that this is not the Ukrainian World Congress somewhere over there. The Ukrainian World Congress is here. You are the Ukrainian World Congress. Lesya sits at our board meetings and actively participates in all the various initiatives that we have moving forward. So we're doing this together. We're active at the World Economic Forum in Davos, clearly carrying our messages to key policy people, to key magazines, journals, papers, and we started an advocacy session in the EU and in NATO with respect to supporting Ukraine and giving it the weapons that it needs. We sent an official delegation in June to Ukraine. You'll see here a picture with General Hillier, Minister of Defense Reznikov, meetings at various levels together with UCC President Alexander Hichi. We visited Bucha, we visited Irpin. We worked with various state organizations, Ministry of Veterans Affairs, Ministry of Defense, Ministry of the Interior, working on how we can find ways on how we support Ukraine today and how we support Ukraine immediately. In July, we started getting involved on the Ukraine recovery side. Ukraine presented in Lugano, Switzerland at the Ukraine Recovery Conference, which we attended, their plan for rebuilding of Ukraine at various stages, which includes a stage today, because Ukraine is rebuilding today. It's fighting today, but it's rebuilding today. We saw the decimation. Ukraine needs to continue to build and rebuild every day. We started to work with various new initiatives like Ukraine 24, which was announced in Davos and started in July, where we worked with the Ministry of Digital Transformation, which was responsible for United 24, to find ways how we could support that valuable initiative by the President of Ukraine. And then in July, we launched a lawsuit. We launched a lawsuit against the government of Canada. And we did so very much cooperatively with the Ukrainian Canadian Congress and Alexander Hichi. That suit is still ongoing, but it sent a very clear message. It was intended to send a clear message, not just to the Canadian government, but to all governments, that any attempts to try to erode the sanctions regime will be met with resistance, and we will take all means possible to ensure that our allies, Ukraine's allies, do not diminish the sanctions regime. And that is a process that is still ongoing, but obviously it's a bit moot right now considering that there is no more Nord Stream 2 pipeline. In August, we raised money to help the Ukrainian drone army. That was the project with United 24, and we are, in fact, we're the second largest donor to Ukraine's drone army at that time. In September, we focused on the UNGA, the United Nations General Assembly, working to try to convince members of the United Nations to, in fact, create an international war crimes tribunal, which we talked about quite a bit yesterday. We are addressing issues with NGOs like Amnesty International, which many of you may remember. They issued a very inappropriate report where they, in fact, put a lot of blame on the Ukrainian military for being too close to civilian areas. And Russia has been exploiting that report in order to justify its war on Ukrainian cities and civilian populations. So we've taken efforts to try to influence and engage with various organizations, again, like Amnesty International. In October, we received a very generous donation from the government of Alberta. We continue to advocate on areas to ensure we continue to support the defenders of Ukraine. And by the end of October, we have delivered over $30 million worth of military gear to support the defenders of Ukraine and launched a new initiative just this month called Winter is Coming, and trying to raise money to help the defenders of Ukraine to support them during the very difficult winter months, which we anticipate will be coming. Again, continuing to do various advocacy initiatives like the Parliamentary Summit for the Crimean Platform, meeting with high-level officials. And I have to tell you that, all these great things that we've been doing, we're building on a foundation. The Ukrainian World Congress has, again, as a foundation, a 55-year strong history. But I will say that coming to Croatia, the doors were open to us. We met at the very senior levels with the Prime Minister, with the Foreign Minister, with the head of the Parliamentary Friendship Group. And this was thanks to the good work of my predecessor, of Eugene Trulli, who built this strong coalition around the world. And we're continuing to build on that. And that's really important to understand, that what we do here as the Ukrainian Canadian Congress, what we do as the Ukrainian World Congress, we continue to build on the efforts and the successes that we all do. This is not an individual effort. This is a team effort. And so we've built this very strong foundation and that's really important to appreciate, is, communities can't support Ukraine overnight. And you can't build communities on Facebook. You need to build communities like we are building here today. And those strong, influential communities are what is going to help Ukraine for, quite frankly, generations to come. And we saw that yesterday with the Prime Minister here, with the Minister of, Deputy Prime Minister, the Minister of Defense. It was an amazing day when you saw the influence. And that's the type of influence that I invite all of you to help me build around the world. And we are really here in Canada a really great example of that. And I want to thank you and the leadership here of the Ukrainian Canadian Congress. Finally, Unite with Ukraine. It's an infographic. I won't read all of it here, but it's an example of the type of equipment and support that we're focusing on. The Unite with Ukraine initiative is not intended to compete with other Ukrainian community fundraising initiatives. And I welcome the humanitarian aid appeal by the Ukrainian Canadian Congress and the Ukrainian World the Canada-Ukraine Foundation. And the reason why we focused on Unite with Ukraine was because we wanted to keep a lane around supporting the defenders of Ukraine. And so we have options to give to our donors. Whether you want to support Ukraine from a humanitarian perspective or you want to help support the defenders of Ukraine, there are different avenues and channels that we want to build out together. So in conclusion of my presentation, and I would like to now take the opportunity to introduce you to someone who is a very esteemed, distinguished Canadian leader. I had the privilege of meeting General Rick Hillier shortly after the full-scale invasion of Ukraine broke out. And General Hillier came to me and said, "Paul, what can I do to help? I want to help, and I want to help in the most maximum way that we can." And we hatched this plan to create a strategic advisory council at the Ukrainian World Congress made up of former generals, retired generals of various NATO countries. And we started to build this team. And today, we've had a couple of people who have left because of other government appointments, such as the UK and Australia. But it's a strong team. We're continuing to build it of retired generals in various NATO countries. And as you see here on the screen, those include who's chairing the committee, retired General Rick Hillier, General Wesley Clark, General David Petraeus from the United States, and General Berline. And so this is a group that will continue to help us, A, in terms of advocacy, and B, in terms of fundraising. But they're also very supportive, and we will be working with the Ukrainian government authorities to help them as much as we can with their various initiatives going forward. So I'd like to take this opportunity and welcome on stage with me General Rick Hillier to talk a little bit about the Strategic Advisory Council and the efforts that we have moving forward. Thank you, General Rick Hillier.
Thank you, Paul. So, Paul, thank you very much. And ladies and gentlemen, good morning. Paul said when we talked just before coming up, he said, we only got about 5 minutes at the end, and if you can constrain yourself to that. And I said, Paul, for God's sakes, I'm a Newfoundlander. It takes us 10 minutes to cross the street in the morning because we have to stop and talk to everybody. That's why the crosswalk lights in St. John's, Newfoundland are 10 minutes long, right? So we can meet and say good morning. So, look, good morning to you. I'm delighted to be here in Winnipeg, delighted to be here at UCC, and delighted to put my shoulder behind the incredible efforts. And I tell you why I got involved there earlier on is because I detest bullies, and I detest murderers, genocidal bullies, and I felt that we should be doing more about stopping bullies. And I've been on the advocacy sort of train for quite a while. I've been doing lots of interviews. I've been pounding on every single government, organization, country to do more and more quickly, and to do it right now and make sure that we know this war is going to end in victory, and we want to make sure that the victory is Ukraine's, not Russia's, and that therefore we have to do so much more. So that's why I'm involved. I compliment and credit Paul here and thank him for his vision in coming up with the idea of the Strategic Advisory Council. And as he alluded to, our role is advocacy and then supporting Ukrainian Defense Forces through supporting where we can, fundraising, and then to helping focus those funds to give their absolutely prioritized use to give the defenders what it is they need first and foremost, and then to continue that advocacy and make that a closed loop, if you will. We advocate, get more money, support the defenders, advocate, get more money, support the defenders. And we do it in the advocacy some of you will know about, much of it you will not. For example, General Dave Petraeus here in the picture gave an interview just a week or so ago, and he talked about the scenario that would occur in his view, as a personal view, that would occur if Russia was stupid enough to use a nuclear weapon. And he articulated what was no doubt a message that the Biden administration has been sending to Moscow, that if you use a nuclear weapon, all sort of limitations are off. We're not going nuclear was his view. And I believe this is what the Biden administration would be sending to as a message to Moscow. We don't have to go nuclear. If you use a nuclear weapon, we know where every single Russian unit is outside of Russia. We know where every single ship is in the Black Sea. We know where every single unit is in Ukraine. And if you go nuclear, we are going to take out every single one of them. And all those ships in the Black Sea fleet, they can wave to the Moscow as they go down, because the conventional weapons overmatch is so great, and that's what will occur. And like myself, Dave Petraeus is a private individual, but have no doubt, have no worries whatsoever. That is a message that the United States government is sending to Moscow, and very clearly doing that. And General Wes Clark, several weeks ago, triggered the initiative by 20 former four-star generals in the United States of America to write to the Biden administration, to the president himself, and say, here is what you must do for Ukraine, because we want that victory for certain to be Ukraine's, and here is what you must do, and laid out the whole sort of menu of what had to be done to ensure that victory and to get it right. So much of the advocacy that occurs you don't necessarily see, but it's happening, and it's coming from the Strategic Advisory Council, which we continue to build. We want to support the defenders of Ukraine. I had the opportunity to go there and visit myself in June, and I got an opportunity to see those incredible individuals. Let me just tell you, you should be really proud. You should be really proud of those men and women who are protecting their families, defending their villages, and making sure their country doesn't fall to this invader. And I had the opportunity to meet so many of them, but just in particular, I'll tell you, I met a father and son team who were a tank hunting team. Now, I know there are a lot of parents here in the audience, like myself, and you do many things with your children, I'm sure, and whether skiing or parachuting or anything else. How many of you have thought about going out for a night's adventure as a tank hunting team, as a father-son bonding experience, right? Pretty incredible, isn't it? The son's nom de guerre was Snake, and the father's was Dragon, and they walked me through one night in late March, and we walked down the road where they had killed 4 Russian T-72 tanks. You imagine now, one night, and they were using the RPG-7, which is an outdated, antiquated, shoulder-fired rocket-propelled grenade launcher. One of the tanks, it took 21 shots to kill. And you're talking about being within 100 meters of those tanks when you fire those shots. So just think about the courage and the valor and the persistence and the determination of not only that father and son tank hunting team, but all of the others who surround them. And I'll tell you, that valor is matched, what I believe as a professional soldier, my entire life has been in the soldiering profession, that valor is matched by innovation and ingenuity that I have never seen before. I don't believe there's a professional army in the West that could do what the Ukrainian Defense Forces have done while fighting for survival. While fighting for survival, assimilating and bringing into service millions of tons of brand new equipment of every single type from across the world, bringing into service the logistics to keep that equipment, to get it into operation first, and then to keep it operating and to keep it going, and then to use it in such an incredible way, strategically, operationally, and finally tactically, to actually reduce the Russian threat on an hourly basis. And whether that's bringing into service those drones and using them for reconnaissance or actually for direct attack itself, linking those drones through the Starlink system back to the shooters, and the shooters can shoot and take out those strategic targets. It's the most innovative and ingenious military actions and military force work that I've seen, I think, ever. And the credit should go to them for what they have done. And you should be so proud of them, and you should support them even more than you're doing right now. It's pretty incredible. And we want to ensure that they're going to get out there and they're going to win going forward. And let me just give you one last example of how incredible that accomplishment is. One of the munitions shipments from the United States, not just one shipment, but what gives was 500,000 rounds of 155 artillery ammunition. Now, most of you have probably never seen a 155 round. It's a big, monstrous, heavy round. That is 5,000 truckloads of ammunition. Just think about that for a second. That's going to come into Poland and be taken by train across the border into Ukraine, and then into trucks, and then forward to the gun positions in the east side now, and then fired. 5,000 truckloads of ammunition. Just think of the logistics piece that had to go to build that up and put that into service. And then you think you got a 155 gun from the United States, you have a different system from France, you have a different one entirely from Poland, and you combine that with all those other things, and they're making it happen with it. Absolutely incredible, and they've taken the strategic initiative away from Russia as a consequence of that. Last thing I want to say is we had, the Prime Minister and Minister of Finance, Minister of Defense here yesterday to talk, and let me give credit to Canada for doing some very, very, very good things. And let me say to Canada, let's do many, 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 many more things, and let's do them more quickly. And I know Canada says we don't have the weapons to send all the time, and we don't have the air defense weapons, and we don't have the long-range artillery, and that's all true. And so you cannot give what you don't have. But we do have a lot of stuff, and James Bazan talked about the armored vehicles. I do think we should turn ourselves inside out to take those armored vehicles which are in storage, haven't been taken out of service, to upgrade them with an armor package, put a new engine in them, and send them to Ukraine and help build that armor brigade counterattack force that Ukraine could use to finish the sweep in the east and get this war over with. But the second thing that I think that Canada could do, and could do a lot more of, and I'm really delighted when I see what's occurring now, is the training of the Ukrainian Defense Forces. President Zelensky wants to build to 1 million soldiers, bringing the territorial defense force to a level of professionalism that it does not have yet because they have not had the training, and they desperately need training. And when we talk to the command structure in the UDF, they say we need the training. We need leadership training at the officer level, leadership training at the NCO level. We need combat skills training for the soldiers. We need technical training for people who are going to fix those guns and do all of that kind of stuff. And Canada does training superbly. I know the minister yesterday mentioned Op Unifier, where Canada in the previous 7 years had trained some 35,000 members of the UDF. And I think some of the success on the battlefield has come because of that training. And I think there's an awesome opportunity here for Canada to do a public-private partnership, to take the Canadian forces in small numbers because they are stressed with the challenges they're having, and to combine that with some of the companies in Canada that do military training on a daily basis for the Canadian forces, and to combine that into a massive training center in Poland and start training, 50,000 a year or more of men and women from the Ukrainian Defense Forces and help set this up for success. So, ladies and gentlemen, I'm delighted to be a part of Unite with Ukraine, with the Ukrainian World Congress, to put my shoulder behind the brave men and women, to assist them in the innovation that they apply and the ingenuity that they use every day, to admire their valor and their courage. And it's my pleasure to be here this morning and talk to you a little bit about it. Thank you so much.
Чи є запити? Are there any questions to Paul Grod, President of UWC, Президент Світового Конгресу України, до Павла Грода або до General Rick Hillier?
Good morning. My name is Yuri Broda. I'm here representing Ukrainian Youth Association of Canada. My question is for General Hillier. You described the ground war, ground support, the rockets, the tanks, all the rest of it. What I'm curious about is the air war. The United States, and I think with its allies, has literally thousands of prior generation aircraft. They have hundreds of A-10 Warthogs sitting in storage that they're trying to get rid of. So what are the challenges to our community to convince the United States and its allies to transfer some of that air assets to the Ukrainian forces? Thank you.
Дякую. I'll just ask, are there any other questions? Чи є ще запити? Як нема, General?
The challenges for that one, I don't think are as great as we think. First of all, I think there is a movement afoot in the United States of America, in the Biden administration, to actually deploy either F-16s or F-18s into Ukraine and do the train up of the Ukrainian Defense Forces to be able to then fly those. And contrary to what I was thinking, just based on my sketchy knowledge of how you train fighter pilots, what they would not want to do is take seasoned fighter pilots in MiG-25s and MiG-29s and convert them to F-16. What they want to do is take brand new kids coming out of flight school and put them in the newer aircraft, because the difference is so vast that you would want to do it that way. That's their business. But I actually believe that in the next months we're going to see an action to transfer F-16s and F-18s. The A-10s are not more problematic. I'm not sure they're much more valuable. It's really tough to operate in that air defense environment. Either if you're Ukrainian going in or Russian coming in, obviously you get shot at, shot down on a routine basis. Nobody likes that. And the A-10, I'm not sure, is the kind of aircraft that would be as powerful, as useful there as the F-16 or F-18 could do right now. I am worried, I will tell you this, and I will say it publicly, I am worried about what occurs after the 8th of November and the midterm elections in the United States of America. The Republicans have been using the support to Ukraine as a divisive issue, as a partisan issue, you know, as in, hey, you can send $20 million to Ukraine, you can't send $20 billion to Ukraine, you can't send $20 million to Florida for the victims of Hurricane Fiona, and they've been using it as a wedge issue. I hope that, you know, good common sense and understanding of peace and democracy and stability around the world reigns supreme on the 9th of November if the Republicans take control of the House and possibly House and Senate, but I am concerned about that piece of it. I think we're going to see movement on the fighter aircraft going in the interim. What I want to see and what I would love to see and what I would advocate for is much more in terms of ground-based air defense weapons, much more in the way of ground-based air defense weapons, and keep the Russian aircraft off, excuse me, and keep the drones away from being able to target, find, and then target, and then link to a shooter for the Russians. So ground-based air defense is what we want to advocate for in the short term, fighters in the middle term.
Proszę, David Prokopchuk, UNO, UNF, Saskatoon. I'm a Ukrainian Canadian, and that ends with Canada. General Hillier, what lessons do you think we should learn and with respect to Canada's safety and Western democracy's safety with the lessons we've learned in the very tragic war in Ukraine?
Any other questions? This is the last chance. Duran, let me ask you one controversial question, General. The Biden administration and the Western democracies, while the Russians were mobilizing their army in December and January, were threatening that if the Russians would continue to mobilize and that if they would actually start an all-out war against Ukraine, that there would be severe consequences. We see the same thing now, and you've mentioned that with them threatening, the United States threatening a much stronger response, actually taking out the Russian army wherever it may be if they would use nuclear weapons. Why can we not start advocating for the Western democracies to stop threatening of what would happen if the Russians do something worse in Ukraine and take the agenda into our hands and start advocating that if they do not leave Ukraine within a prescribed period, that those would be the consequences to take out the Russian army wherever it may be.
I would just make a comment or so on that last question or point first, and then I'll come back to lessons that we should have learned here. You know, nothing would please Putin more than to have NATO seen as his enemy attacking Russian forces in order to mobilize Mother Russia and mobilize 200 million Russians to go and fight against the great enemy NATO, which he's been trying to make the case for, but has failed because NATO is not actually involved directly into the fight. But back to what I said earlier, if Ukraine combines the valor of its incredible soldiers with their ingenuity and innovation, with the equipment and the support and the intelligence and the communications and the sanctions and all of those things, and obviously financial support from the West, they can do the job and do it well without NATO having to put forces on the ground and get involved in the direct fight itself. The use of a nuke by Russia, and let's face it, we don't know what Putin is going to do. We don't know what he's going to do in defeat. We know what he does in victory, don't we? I mean, look at Bucha and Irpin and what's occurred there. But we don't know if he'll use a nuke or a dirty bomb by wrapping radioactive material around a conventional explosive. And those messages are all designed to ensure that he understands the seriousness of that and the fact that it would be a game changer, and then NATO would be involved because use of a nuclear weapon would be completely unacceptable. I can't sort of parse all of the strategies from the Biden administration and the Russian leadership around Putin, but that's my view of it. As to what we've learned for Canada, I think we've learned that our stability and security rest on stability and security in the world. I mean, let's face it, prices of gas, inflation, interruptions in our supply chains all come back to Russia and the war in Ukraine and its brutal invasion. Our security and stability rest in international security and stability, and our international security and stability rest in us being a member of international organizations like NATO and like the United Nations, and playing an incredible and important and an influential role there by our actions to help make those organizations stronger. And people talk about NATO never being closer, never being more united. That's wonderful. NATO also has to have the conventional capabilities and all the warfighting capabilities to ensure that they are a deterrent, and Canada needs to uphold its part of that. We have been a parasite on NATO for a long time. I've said that before publicly. We've done well on some missions, but specifically, we need to learn the lesson that armed forces are important to democracies, to security, to stability. Being an important part of NATO is crucial to our security and stability, and I would hope that we're going to learn the lessons that spending 1% of our GDP on defense is not nearly enough, and we need to double that to 2% and perhaps go more. So I think we've learned all those lessons. I hope that we apply them in the future.
On that, we close this informative report of the Ukrainian World Congress. Я щиро дякую президентові Світового конгресу українців Павлові Гродові. General Rick Hillier, thank you very much for your presentation. And all of the delegates, I think, with the standing ovation that you got, certainly support the Ukrainian World Congress and wish you all of the best in your superbly important work for the Ukrainian cause.